a hit and run killed a man in Brooklyn. Police say the victim was crossing the street when he was hit. The driver just kept going. Kids are arguing, saying that's not possible. He was teaching me in my classroom.
Welcome back to Why Walking Matters, the Science Explained, the podcast where we explore the many ways walking shapes our health, our communities, and our lives. When we talk about the benefits of walking, we often focus on what happens inside our bodies: stronger hearts, healthier brains, better moods, and longer lives. But today, we're going to explore something equally important: the environment around us. After all, people are much more likely to walk when they feel safe doing so. Today's guest is filmmaker Ben Wolf, director of the documentary Changing Lanes. The film follows a community struggle in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. A powerful story about transportation, public health, and community advocacy. Today, Ben and I will discuss the story behind Changing Lanes, the role of street design in shaping behavior, and why walkability may be one of the overlooked factors affecting public health. Ben Wolf, welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. I am a Brooklyn-based filmmaker. I think the reason that you're having me on your podcast is I recently completed a documentary called Changing Lanes about sort of the politics around the way our streets are designed, specifically in Brooklyn, New York, but I think more generally in cities in America, and how that compares, well, both the history of how our streets have changed and how they compare with other places around the world, and most particularly, I think, how we balance automobiles, bicycles, pedestrians, and how we either do a good job or maybe not such a good job of that.
Okay, thank you. You jumped right into it. I kind of wanted to get to know you first. I'm always
Sure.
interested in how people end up where they do, especially when through their work you can see that they're clearly passionate about what they do. What was your journey to making documentaries?
Okay. Well, it's a long story. I grew up in California. I went east way back in the late 80s to go to college, and then ended up in New York City in 1991. And a few years later, I got a MFA in film directing at Columbia. And so since then, I've worked in film. Mostly I do camera work, cinematography, and the work I've enjoyed the most is documentary work. I feel it's the thing I do that I feel really makes a positive contribution versus a lot of the more commercial types of work that I do, which I look at more as just a way to pay the rent.
Mm-hmm.
I had wanted, anyway, I worked primarily in other people's movies, and for a long time I had wanted to do my own film. And so it brings me back to this film that I just created. I have, well, I've been a passionate cyclist sort of all my life. I used to race bikes, and now I ride them around a lot for transportation. In New York, I also walk a lot, as do most people in New York. And I also have a car in New York, which primarily is just for work because it's a pretty challenging way to get around the city. That the traffic is pretty horrible, and it's quite expensive just to park this thing. And so anyway, I use all these modes of transportation, and I've been interested in sort of the interplay between them, and for a long time. And I've seen a lot of change happen in New York in the time that I've been here. So again, I sort of thought that would be something interesting to explore. Change in the way the streets are organized. The car has really dominated, even in New York, where most people don't have cars. The cars have really dominated the streets. And in the time I've been here, little bits are being taken back for other uses, which is something I find exciting.
Let's tell us about
Uh,
Changing Lanes, the movie.
yeah. So, well, for about 3 years, I followed. Okay, well, to take it back, really, the story that I followed really began in 2021 when a elementary school teacher in this neighborhood of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, uh, was killed hit by a car that sped off on his birthday while crossing the street.
Wow.
This was a street called McGinnis Boulevard in Greenpoint, which is one of the more dangerous streets in New York. It's not the only dangerous street, but it's probably in the top 10, and it had been for a long time. It's almost like a highway going through a pretty dense residential community where people need to cross the street for any number of reasons, to go to school, to shop, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And this was created in the 1950s. It had been a sort of a small little residential lane and about 400 or 500 homes were knocked down to widen it. In the middle of the 20th century, there was a lot of that going on in cities where they were just putting highways right through cities. From today's vantage point, that mostly doesn't look like a very positive thing. And we now know that something approaching apparently a couple hundred people were killed on this particular boulevard over the years. There was a serious injury in a crash about once a week. And, basically to much of the community that was no longer acceptable, particularly when this sort of beloved teacher was killed. And so a lot of that neighborhood got organized to try to do something about it, to make this street safe for people walking, for cyclists, for everybody, and to not just have it be a thing where cars could just speed through with sort of impunity. And that seems pretty sensible, but the politics being what it is, it's actually quite hard to get it done. So while a lot of people, probably the majority, wanted that, some very loud and powerful groups in the community really resisted it. And I sort of followed the back and forth over 3 years. I don't want to ruin all the twists and turns and the surprise ending, but a lot happened, and it was sort of I thought, an interesting microcosm to look at how difficult it is in America right now to sort of make changes, even changes that like are life-saving changes that at least to me seem pretty obvious that something needed to be done.
Mm-hmm. So what drew you to this particular story?
Well, I was looking for it's a couple things. One, again, I sort of have this passion for how we get around cities, and particularly pedestrian and bicycle as ways to get around. I find it. I'm somebody that also travels a lot for work. I also have a house in Italy, and I see, like, the reason I think we love so many of these foreign destinations is because they're so wonderful for walking and biking around, and we often don't see that here. But maybe the reason I live in New York is it's closer to that than most parts of America. Like LA, where I grew up, you really don't have much options to get around other than to get in your car. Sometimes you're lucky if there's even a sidewalk. So this seemed like an interesting area to explore. I also am sort of very preoccupied with politics, as I think maybe most people are these days, and this
Yeah.
sort of
I think we have
sick
to be.
feeling that that whatever's going on, whatever side you're on or whatever, it just doesn't seem like we're making progress, and it's very frustrating. And again, especially when I compare what I see happening here with what I see happening in other parts of the world, where seemingly a lot more progress is being made in areas that I care about, be it healthcare, be it transportation, education, whatever. So I wanted to find a way to make a political movie, but that wasn't sort of a preachy movie or too grandiose. I sort of was looking for a specific story to follow.
Yes. I don't want to give away too much, but it was mainly about a community's journey to getting some change to their streets. Um, for many reasons, including the one that you mentioned, which I guess was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Um, their beloved teacher dying. Um,
Yep.
so I kind of want to, you guys reached out. You thought that this podcast, which explores the benefits of walking, would be a good platform to, I guess, get your story out. And
Yep.
you approached that kind of a connection by talking about walkability as a health variable. And so that's kind of the main topic of the show today. So, to start, what exactly do you mean by walkability?
Well, I suppose at the most basic level, what my film in many ways is about is could just be safety, and maybe one of the most basic definitions of walkability is just, is it safe to walk there?
Mhm.
Because we all know about health benefits and physical and mental health benefits of walking.
Yes.
But if you're going to get seriously injured or killed, kind of that undermines all that stuff. So before we can even have a healthy stroll, we have to be able to have a safe place to have that, to do that walking. And I guess, well, one of the things that I learned a lot about in making this movie is how is the history of streets, and specifically I'm looking at New York, but I think it's more generally true. Streets before early 20th century, were about, primarily they were about
Yeah.
walking, some streetcars, some horses, but that's how people got around. And in the 20th, and they were sort of, because people were just walking on them, there was a lot of activities that could be happening. People could be just hanging out. It could be, there could be some sorts of commerce that was happening. Kids were out just playing, enjoying it was almost like a park in many ways, like a public space where people could do a variety of things. And over the course of the 20th century, most of that went away as the car just gradually took over, and it made it unsafe to do anything else on the streets. So pedestrians end up pushed to sidewalks, if there are sidewalks. Often the sidewalks were made narrower and narrower and narrower as more and more and more space was given to cars. In my opinion, that was not beneficial for, it obviously, I have a car and there's a place for a car, but giving up sort of almost all your public space to cars and taking away space for every other activity seems like a bad bargain, especially I would argue in a city. Like, to me, the whole point of being in a city is that things are close, which means you can interact with people, you can walk to places. But if suddenly all the public spaces are no longer safe to do that, or very unpleasant because of exhaust fumes and, literally like having to run to dodge fast moving vehicles, it sort of undermines the whole point of having of cities, really. And so again, I'm sort of excited by the prospect that we can change, that we can sort of re-embrace some of the better aspects of the past, while also enjoying the conveniences of the present.
Yeah, well said. I've seen photographs of before, and I guess just at the point where the cars were introduced and the streets were a shared place. You'd see pedestrians, kids, you'd see animals,
Sure.
everyone in the street. And I've never actually looked at what, like any statistics about, you know, injuries or anything like that, accidents back then, but it seemed that people were able to share the streets, and I guess um it's down to design. So
Yes.
I guess one of the questions that I've thought about in thinking about this topic is what the key elements of walkability are in a neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, again, with regards specifically to, and I think that could be answered in a lot of ways, but I think an awful lot of it boils down simply to separating out vehicles going different speeds. Basically, when you mix pedestrians and bikes and cars, and the cars are going 40 miles an hour and the bikes are going 20 miles an hour and the pedestrians are going 5 or 3 miles an hour, that's a prescription for disaster. And I think that places, again, if we're going to look at especially cities in Western Europe, Copenhagen and Amsterdam are often looked at as models. It's about separating out these different modes so they're not all sort of on top of each other. It's, so the car is often pushed to like an outer part of the city, while the sort of historic inner cities are much more designed to favor other, public transportation, walking, bikes. I mean, that's the short answer. And again, what's particularly strange to me in the context of New York, because in a lot of America, walking is something that actually most people, is actually, like in LA where I grew up, most people don't walk very much, or if they do, it's specifically just to get exercise, like they'll drive somewhere nice and then walk and then drive home or whatever. In New York, most people don't have cars. Most people, to get around, are using transit and walking. That is, in fact, what most people are doing. So I have always found it odd that even in New York, where that is the case, still we gave over almost all of our public space to the automobile, which was never a thing that most people were doing. It just seems like an oddity. And I don't have all the answers to exactly why that happened, although I don't think you have to be a genius to understand a lot of it had to do with what was good for business, not necessarily what was good for people.
Yes.
This arrangement was great for the oil companies. It was great for the car companies. It was great for the steel companies. All of these are very sort of politically powerful groups. Often it was quite bad for people, especially poor people or immigrant people that lived in these communities where they were just knocking down, whole neighborhoods to put in more and more fast-moving car traffic. And it destroys walkability. It makes a place very unpleasant to be in. In some cases, in the worst cases, even things like respiratory disease are going way up because people are having to breathe all these fumes. I mean, it's really
so
incredibly unwalkable.
Yeah, it's interesting you say it. So we, here on the podcast, we explore the benefits of walking. Each week, we know that the research is clear that walking regularly improves overall health, including cardiovascular health, joint and bone strength,
Sure.
blood sugar regulation, healthy aging, and even mood. So, it, do you really think that the walkability of a neighborhood influences the amount people walk in their daily lives? Do you think that
I
if
have
neighborhoods,
100%,
yeah,
100%.
okay. And is there data, is there research or data to support that? Or is this just something that you strongly believe just from your own experience?
There is data to support it. Don't ask me to provide
Yeah.
it. And I know more about similar data around cycling because that's something that I've sort of been more specifically focused on. When you build good cycling infrastructure, surprise, surprise, people start doing the thing. This should come as zero surprise that when something is unpleasant or unsafe, people aren't going to do it. When you give people an opportunity, when you create a beautiful protected bike lane, or when you pedestrian, like Times Square is an example as far as
Yes.
walking, it was completely given over to cars. And in the Bloomberg era, the head of transportation in the city, Jeanette Sada Khan, who's somebody that I feature in my film, took away, pedestrianized Times Square, and that was very controversial at the time. People, especially local businesses, many thought that, oh, you're taking away cars, our businesses are going to suffer.
Yes, I remember.
Well, that's not what happened. What happened is you make a place pleasant to walk. You actually are inviting people to come, and now there are many, many, many more people spending their time and their money in Times Square than there ever were when it was all about cars. So that's a good sort of anecdotal example of what we're talking about.
Yes,
Where
and
when you make something pleasant, guess what? People are happy to take advantage of it.
yes, that's definitely a model for this concept. So, it, looking at it that way, should this concept of walkability be seen as a public health topic or an urban planning issue?
I I don't. I think it's I think it's certainly both. I think it's certainly both.
Yeah.
And I also think in dense cities like New York, you really have no choice, really. If you care about people, like if you just if you're only giving people cars as the solution to getting around, it's just not going to work. There's just not enough space for all these cars. And to the extent that that's the only option, the result is simply going to be like terrible, terrible traffic, which is what you have in New York, which is why most people would rather just jump on the subway or it's literally faster for me to jump on my bike and bike somewhere than to like try to drive. And crazily enough, in some cases, I literally think walking would be as fast as driving because the cars, there's a light at every corner. It's
Yeah.
an extremely inefficient way to get around. I guess part of my passion would be not just thinking about walking as far and cycling as for exercise, but I love the fact that these are practical. Again, if you live in a city, like most of what I need, if I'm not going to work on a given day, is within like 5 or 10 blocks of my house. And I can easily just take care of my needs, and get exercise. While like this morning, I got my hair cut. I went to Trader Joe's. I did a variety of things that I needed to get done. With probably walked a couple miles. It's
Perhaps,
pleasant,
yes.
it's fun, and you're going about your life. You're not needing to sort of separate out, oh, I need to do this thing for exercise. It's just
Yes.
happening.
It's incorporated within your day.
Hmm.
I
I
think,
think what's almost perverse is the way we've sort of separated things out, and instead of making it like just design cities and streets so that people can live in a healthy, convenient way, and then they maybe don't actually have to like go to the health club to work out because they're actually just burning calories and getting doing what they need to do.
that's actually one of the um, concepts that come up when we look at the blue zones and how
Yeah.
people within blue zones, how they're just daily life. It's, walking and movement and how they eat and what they do. It's just built into their just daily movement. Um, you mentioned being able to, just like walk to wherever you need to go to the grocery store to get a haircut. And it leads me to thinking about something that I wasn't sure if it would come up, but it's kind of I guess, a good segue into talking about equity and
Yeah.
walkability and street design and places, because I can imagine that there's more that would need to be thought through rather than just street design in certain neighborhoods. Because even if they design the street in a way where it's more walkable, um, you know, all the other, the grocery stores and all the other little things that the restaurants that might be nice to walk to aren't there. And so it sounds to me like this is possibly even a bigger conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a very good point, and it's a huge subject. And I'm not an academic or an urban planner. I
Yeah.
can just give a couple of observations.
Hmm.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of sort of chicken and egg stuff here. Like, do you build the roads to get, and then the neighborhood improves, or do you improve the
Right.
neighborhood and then, and also this gets mixed up with the whole concept of gentrification with all the sort of good and
Right.
bad aspects of gentrification. So
Right.
like a lot of the resistance to like pedestrianizing places or putting in bike lanes is people say, oh, you're gentrifying it, you're going to price me out, which sadly might be true in some cases. On the other hand, is somebody making that argument saying I'd prefer to have a really, unpleasant, dangerous neighborhood than
Right.
one that was nicer? Like it's, I think you're right that we can't look at these street improvements in isolation from also
Right.
worrying about, well, how are we going to, allow all sorts of people to continue to live in this neighborhood, and how are we going to encourage, whatever good businesses to open up here? I mean,
Right.
this is all interwoven and
Yeah.
complex, and I don't have all the answers, but
Obviously, yeah.
I do think that everybody deserves safe, pleasant streets. I mean, that to me doesn't seem too much to ask.
Yeah,
And
it's a good conversation starter at least.
sure, and I would just also add that I don't think that we should be too comfortable or too accepting of a status quo that is killing people. Um, like I do know some very specific statistics that I learned while making this documentary, that American cities, we have about 4 times as much injury and death on our streets compared to Western Europe and Japan in particular. That is dramatic. I mean, that is,
That is.
thousands of people getting killed, probably tens or hundreds of thousands of people getting injured every year, that if things were just literally designed better, it wouldn't be happening. And so to me, I mean, that's something I don't even see that there is an argument against that, really. It's so,
There shouldn't
once
be.
you know that things can be better, then they actually, in that way, then they need to be better. And to not do that is just sort of not caring about people's lives. And I just I'm very uncomfortable with that idea that we don't care.
So, for listeners evaluating their own neighborhoods, what are there relatively small changes that local governments can make that can have an effect on walkability?
Absolutely. Um, I think what happened on McGinnis Boulevard is a very good case study of a local community getting organized, and working with their local, assembly people and state senators, to fight, very hard and for years, but to finally accomplish it, to really make changes. I can tell you, McGinnis Boulevard basically is no longer the sort of dangerous thoroughfare that it had been. It is no longer sort of a highway that goes through the community. It was almost taken back to what it had originally been. It is now down to 2 lanes of cars with much more space for pedestrians, much more space for bikes. And like crossing 2 lanes of cars is a very different experience than crossing 4 lanes of cars.
Yes, absolutely. That's a success story.
And it's just subjectively way more pleasant to walk there. It literally felt before like you were walking next to a highway. It was just like, this is not, you just had the feeling this is not a place where I want to walk, period. And now it's sort of night and day. If you go there now, and I
It
believe,
changes the vibe of the neighborhood.
absolutely. And I think you're going to see, this has only happened in the last year, and parts of it are only being implemented literally as we speak. But I think you will start to see a very different vibe on that street. I think you're going to start to see, cafes, things that are catering to people that actually want to
Yes.
spend time there, instead of
Hmm.
just like industrial businesses where people just didn't think of it as a place where they wanted to ever spend
Or
any time.
yeah, or live. Actually
Yep.
have a life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But
So,
because it's Brooklyn,
mhm.
people were living there, and that's again why we had all this danger. It was almost like having an industrial area, but also residential, and that's very difficult to combine those two things.
Yeah. So, um, I guess we're almost toward the end of our conversation. Um, what is one thing that you wish every listener understood about the connection between where we live and how much we walk?
Well, it's interesting. I guess I think most people have enough variety of experience to see that some places are much more pleasant to walk than others, and I just think people should try to not accept the status quo, not accept that just because a place is unpleasant or dangerous that it has to be that way. I think that's the important thing, is to believe in the possibility of change, and to look around and to understand that even that almost every place has changed a lot already. Like as we've talked
This is
about,
true.
streets that are now
Yes.
dominated by cars once had horses on them. Like, things
Yes.
have changed, and they can continue to change. And if you want to see change, I'd encourage people to get organized and to fight for it. I think these things are it's sort of underappreciated, and I think there's just tends to be an acceptance of the way things are, as though that's inevitable and nothing can be done. But I think, again, I think this movie is a good illustration of the fact that something was done, and it's made a huge difference.
Yes, perfect point. And finally, we haven't had many guests on the podcast. You'll be our fourth, but we have already established a tradition of asking each guest, what is your personal relationship with walking? Outside of work, what role does walking play in your own life?
Well, as somebody, I'll tell you this: I split my time between Brooklyn, and I actually have a place in Sicily where I spend 2 or 3 months of the year, and those are very different places. But I realize that one of the things they have in common is that they're both all about walking. In both places, my number one mode of transportation is my feet. And I think that's why I'm attracted. I grew up in California, but the reason that I don't live there and that I live in New York, I think, is largely to have this kind of life where I can walk out my door, take care of my daily needs within, half a mile of my house, and constantly, run into people that I know. I can live a much more sort of active, spontaneous life where somebody can call me, and say, hey, you want to meet here in an hour? And I'm like, sure. And there they are. It's to me, that's sort of the reason to live in a city. Like, it'd be one if you're in the country, okay, you've isolated yourself. But to be in a city, to me, the whole point is to be like in a community with other people. And I think,
yes.
yeah, and I think walking is sort of the number one way that you enjoy that.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you sharing not only the story behind changing lanes, but also the broader lessons about how design of our communities can influence our safety, our health, and our willingness to walk. It's been a fascinating conversation. One thing before you go, please share, where can listeners watch the film Changing Lanes?
Okay. Well, it just started streaming. It's on Amazon and Canopy. Additionally, there are sort of public screenings of the film that are still happening in different cities. And if you'd like to follow those, or perhaps even request a screening, you can find out more information on the website for the film, which is Changing Lanes Doc, DOC, like documentary, .com.
Okay, changinglanesdoc.com.
You got it.
Thanks again, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
One of the things that really stood out to me from both the film and our conversation today is that walking is often thought of as an individual choice, but our ability and willingness to walk is heavily influenced by the environments we create. Safe crossings, accessible sidewalks, traffic calmed streets, and thoughtful design aren't just infrastructure decisions. They're also health decisions. For listeners, I hope today's discussion serves as a reminder that every step we take happens within a larger community context. When we make our neighborhoods safer and more walkable, we're not only encouraging physical activity, we're creating places where people can connect, thrive, and move through life with greater confidence and independence. If you'd like to learn more about changing lanes or watch the documentary, I'll include links in the show notes. Thanks again, listeners, for joining me today on Why Walking Matters, The Science Explained. If you enjoyed this episode, please be kind, share it with a friend. And as always, you can share your walking story or topics for the podcast at whywalkingmatters.com. Until next time, keep walking, stay curious, and remember, every step matters.